I'm not
maybe
trying
that's
to
true of you.
whitewash.
No,
You
I
know, I mean,
understand.
if this is an interview saying, you know, you are responsible for, you know, where the Tories are, I'm going to put my hand up and say, yes, I am partially responsible for that. Liz Truss, as the Prime Minister, has some responsibility.
Of course.
But there were also other things that have happened that have really made the situation as bad or not improved things.
Kwasi Kwarteng was the man holding the purse strings under Liz Truss, but he was then shoved sideways when things started to go sideways, being blamed for part of the chaos of the mini budget and these unfunded tax cuts. What was, though, the impact of that period on this Conservative government? Is it still affecting the election now? And where do the Conservatives go from here? Former Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng joins me now. Welcome to the programme.
Hello, Andrew. Good to hear from you. Good to hear your voice once again.
Let me ask you this. Isn't it fair to say that the Tories never really recovered from that brief cluster truss interregnum when you and Liz Truss were running the economy?
I think that's true, but it wasn't inevitable at the time. I mean, if you remember when Rishi Sunak came in, his view was that he was going to stabilize the situation and then give something positive. And at the time, it wasn't inevitable that we would be 20 points behind the general election. In fact, historically, most polls go back to the government as the election nears, and there was a reasonable expectation that that would happen this time. The other thing that's devastated our position was something which wasn't even an issue when I was in government, was the reform vote. Reform, I think, were on about 3 or 4%, I checked, in October 22 when I left. And today they're now at 16 or 17%. So that development has happened all after Liz Truss and I left office. But I do accept that, you know, it showed an erosion of Conservative support. And you're quite right, looking back, there hasn't been an improvement. But there've also been mistakes in the last 20 months that point to our situation.
Indeed, some political events just go into the historic memory, and they have a long shadow, and they're hard to shake. I mean, I think of Black Wednesday under John Major.
Yeah.
It happened only a few months after he got surprisingly
right.
re-elected, but he never shaked it off. And as of the interregnum period, the cluster truss, as I'm calling it, John Curtis, our most famous pollster, he says that period of the Truss-Kwarteng administration had a lasting effect. He said in April, the problem for the government is that once we start any debate about the economy, all the opposition has to say is Liz Truss. And that's the end of the argument.
I mean, I think you're partially right. Yes, it was a difficult time, but there's a lot that's happened since then that you know has not made our position better. In fact, I was reading columns in the Times saying no, this is like '92. The grown-ups are now in charge. And I wish they had been. I wish they had settled and turned around the situation. But all I'm saying is that there have been things that have happened since October 2022, which have made the position worse, not better.
But of course, the economy started getting better after Black Wednesday had worked its way through. And so the economy wasn't in bad shape when Labour won in '97, but it didn't do the Tories any good because people still had that Black Wednesday memory.
I'm not trying to whitewash. No, I mean, if this is an interview saying, you are responsible for, where the Tories are, I'm going to put my hand up and say, yes, I am partially responsible for that. Liz Truss, as the Prime Minister, has some responsibility.
Of course.
But there were also other things that have happened that have really made the situation as bad or not improved things. That's all I'm saying. I don't think,
I understand.
We love apportioning blame to individuals and then saying that other people are totally blameless. But actually, all the leadership of the party in the last 5 years has had something to do with where we are today.
Now, you're right in saying, the Tories started being really on the wrong end of the polls at that period of autumn 2022, and almost nothing Mr. Sunak has done has really changed that very much. They've still stayed, Labour, about 20 points ahead, and it hasn't narrowed, even as the campaign has gone on. Looking back over the past 20-odd months or so, What could the government have done differently that would have made a difference?
It's very interesting. I mean, I think you're going to see this debate if the Tories do lose, which is likely, as all the polls are suggesting. This is a debate that will dominate the Tory party for the next few months. There'll be some people who said, well, we didn't do enough to consolidate the base with reform. And the fact that Mr. Sunak brought in national service and talked about pensioner or exempting pensioners from taxation suggests that he has that view himself, that he wants to have a core base, a core vote strategy. And that was why I think the D-Day blunder was so damaging, because it alienated the very people that he was trying to win on side.
From what you've just said, it seems that although you never go, if you're a loyal party supporter, you never give up hope. But in fact, in reality, the Tory party position for this election cannot be recovered, and opposition is well nigh inevitable.
Look, I think, I've been a candidate in 5 general elections. This one would have been my 6th. And this is by far the toughest election we've had since 97, by far. And it's unprecedented, really, to win from a deficit of, an average of 20% down in the polls. So realistically, I think it's likely, not a certainty, I'm not saying it's prejudged, but I'm saying it's likely that we may be facing a period of opposition. That's all I'm saying. And I think anyone who looks at this neutrally would say the same thing.
Well, given that, which you said quite clearly, and it is likely, I put it no higher than that, you're saying it is likely the Conservatives are heading for opposition. In that, would you fear or would you welcome the Tory party becoming more reform-like, more Farage?
That's a very interesting question. Look, so you mentioned the point. I mean, John Curtis says the mini-budget had its effect, and I totally see where he's coming from. But the major thing that's happened, polling-wise, in that 18 months is the rise of reform. I think they were about 3 or 4% at the end of 2022, not more than 5, certainly. And now we've seen them in one poll, at least, only 2 points behind the Conservatives. That's an extraordinary thing to have happened. And most of that increase, if you look at the polling, has happened since October 2023. It wasn't something that was happening for all of 23. It's happened quite quickly, quite suddenly. And indeed, Farage coming out with what he said last week in terms of standing for a seat, that has accelerated their support. And that's what's turned this, Andrew, into an existential crisis for the Conservatives. I think people were anticipating a defeat along the lines of 97, 160, 170 seats. But the MRP polling that we're seeing now is far worse than 160 seats.
Indeed.
And the reason for that, I would suggest, is partly, largely, due to the increase in the reform voting intention.
So does it follow?
You can't blame Liz Truss for that. You can't blame me.
No, that's not the importance of the question I'm about to ask you. Does it follow from what you've just said that in opposition, as the Tory party tries to pick itself up again and put itself together, that it has to become more like reform or has to do business with reform?
It's a very difficult question, because ultimately I think we'll only be able to judge it once we've seen the results of the election. And also the polls themselves on reform are quite, say, different things. I mean, some people have them on 10%. Others, I think YouGov have them on 17%, which is a huge difference. Now, if they do get anywhere near 17%, the argument to do some sort of deal with them, to welcome them, to kind of coordinate with them becomes much stronger than if they only get 8 or 9%. So that will, the numbers will dictate a lot of the argument. From my point of view, I think that if you're a Conservative party and you put up taxes, you preside over substantial immigration, I mean, I'm talking hundreds of thousands when we used to campaign on tens of thousands. You're perceived not to have hollowed out defence, which some people are suggesting. Then you have to get back to being a Conservative party, and you have to get back to reassuring your base. And I think that's where Rishi Sunak started. That's why he came up with national service. That's why he's said that pensioners will be exempt from taxation and the kinds of fiscal drag, as they call it, that they're about to suffer from. So Rishi Sunak's team itself recognised that we have to focus on our core vote, and that's what they've been doing over the last 2 weeks.
We've seen already a more populist realignment of the right in France, some extent in Germany too, in Poland, and certainly in Italy, where that realignment has resulted in a populist right in government with a prime minister. Suella Braverman says, and I quote, "There isn't much difference between the Tories and Reform, and they should embrace Nigel Farage."
No, I understand. Look, and also you're an analyst of politics.
Is she right?
Look, you're an analyst of politics, that's why I greatly appreciate your broadcasting. This has happened all over the Western world. I mean, arguably, the Republicans under Trump are a populist rebrand and takeover from the Bush Republicans that we used to know.
That was a hostile takeover.
Yeah, and it's happened in France, as you say. The Les Républicains are essentially a diminished force. Le Pen has taken over. It's happened in Italy, as you say, all over the Western world. And I think what Farage wants to do is to, what he says, take over the Conservative Party. I think that's too aggressive. But clearly, some of the people who will vote for him, have to vote Conservatives for the Conservatives to be competitive. That's obvious to me. Now, how you win them back, whether there's an amalgamation or a merger or what the mechanics of that are, I can't say now. I don't think anyone can. You'd have to look at the result of the election. But clearly, some of those people who voted Conservative in 2019, who the polls tell us a number of whom are voting Reform this time, some of them are going to have to come back for the Conservatives to be competitive.
Let me finish by asking you this question. If we do, and it's a big if, but if we do see a more populist realignment of the right in this country, as we've seen in Europe and as we've been talking about these recent minutes, if that does happen, should Liz Truss be thinking of another leadership bid?
No, I don't think she should. I think she's had her chance. And I think it's time for other people. I mean, that's one of the reasons I'm standing down. I think it's time for others to reinvent, if that's what needs to happen, the Conservative Party. I think it's time for a new generation, people we haven't even heard of, will emerge and be the leaders of the future.
Well, we shall see who they are in the months and years ahead. Kwasi Kwarteng, thank you for joining me on Times Radio.